I just truly, truly feel blessed. And I raised these 5 marvelous children who married marvelous spouses and have given me 12 marvelous grandchildren that I delight in. And then if you go through this way, then you can go through the porch and get to your place. How's that?
Go ahead, I'll help you guys.
Okay, I'll just grab it for us.
Well, we had a pretty happy life, I think. We had lots of kids, and my mom and dad. We did not have a large extended family. Not a lot of cousins, because my dad was a lot older than my mother. But we managed, and we always lived in a fairly decent neighborhood, and you know, we had a pretty good life. Everybody was poor in those days, so we just had to make do with what we had, but we managed to have a good time. Well, I met your grandpa when I went to Denver. I lived in a rooming house with a lot of gals, and Tom went out with one of the other girls that in the house. I don't remember exactly how those two got together, but anyhow, he started dating me, and I didn't have any expectations of falling in love with him, but that's what happened. And I told him from the very beginning, when I realized he was serious about me, that I was black, and so it probably was never going to work out, and it was breaking my heart, but I felt he had to know right now. So anyhow, he just did not accept that as an excuse at all. And he said it did not matter. And I think part of it is because he spent a couple of years in Japan, and he was used to seeing brown people, and he found out brown people behave just like white people did. And he said, I always was shocked to look in the mirror and see that I was white, and everybody around me was brown. And he was very, very lucky that he had supportive parents. He told them that I was black, and they weren't thrilled to death, but then they wanted their son to be happy. I guess I never thought about being black too much, you know, unless it was brought face to face to me by somebody else. I just didn't think about it too much. I know my kids had some difficult times because they would come home and we would talk about it, and the girls were the ones that maybe were worried the most about would we ever find anybody. I said, someplace out there is somebody that's going to love you for what you are, whether you are white, black, whatever. And whatever color or person that they had brought back to the family, if they loved them, that's all that mattered. And if they wanted to spend the rest of their life with them, that's all that mattered. And I am very blessed that all of my children are still with their original spouses. And there are an awful lot of families that can't, aren't able to say that.
Go for your daddy. There you go.
Honey?
Yep, go ahead.
Very good.
How can she cut so straight?
Rachel, put your hand down.
Very good. That's good.
Now it's okay.
That's all good. I can do the rest.
I can do the rest.
All right, well, wait.
You gotta watch
One more.
Yeah, one more. Be careful.
Very
wanna do the
good.
No more working with the whole cake at once because we might not eat it.
It'll dry out, honey, it'll dry out. It will.
Okay, could you say your name for me?
Berenice, Audrey, Bond, Ellis.
Okay, the first question I have to ask you is, what was it like growing up for you?
Well, we had a pretty happy life, I think. We had lots of kids, and my mom and dad. We did not have a large extended family. I did have grandparents on both sides when I was a kid, but not a lot of cousins because my dad was a lot older than my mother. But we managed, and we always lived in a fairly decent neighborhood, and we had kids that we played with in our neighborhood, and we had a pretty good life. Everybody was poor in those days, so we just had to make do with what we had, but we managed to have a good time. Oh, in high school, I had a pretty good time because I had some close friends. I was in the band and in the orchestra, and that was almost like a family unto itself. And so almost all my friends were people that were interested in exactly the same things I was interested in. Of course, there were no proms and there was no dating. But other than that, I would say had a very good time in high school. Well, I met your grandpa when I went to Denver. I'd been in college for a year and a half and I wasn't very happy there. And so, yeah, my brother Frank had to leave the area because he had asthma so badly the doctor said if he didn't get out of Wisconsin he was going to die. And he was on his way to California to go to Stanford. And so we stopped in Denver. He said, the doctor said, travel until you find a place where you can breathe. So that happened to be Denver, and so we stopped there, and then Frank went on to college, and I got a job, and I lived in a rooming house with a lot of gals, and Tom went out with one of the other girls that in the house. I don't remember exactly how those two got together, but anyhow, he started dating me, and I didn't have any expectations of falling in love with him, but that's what happened. And I told him from the very beginning when I realized he was serious about me that I was black, and so it probably was never going to work out, and it was breaking my heart, but I felt he had to know right now. So anyhow, he just did not accept that as an excuse at all. And he said it did not matter. He went to segregated schools in the South, and he always thought it was stupid, but you know, those were the rules, and so what could you do about it? And I think part of it is because he spent a couple of years in Japan, and he was used to seeing brown people, and he found out brown people behaved just like white people did. And he said, I always was shocked to look in the mirror and see that I was white, and everybody around me was brown. And that probably had something to do with forming his attitudes. And he was very, very lucky that he had supportive parents. Your great-grandparents, Ellis. I mean, he told them that I was black, and they weren't thrilled to death, but then they wanted their son to be happy. And so we became very, very good friends.
Did he have Native American
Who?
ancestry, Grandpa?
He had somewhat place way back. I heard a story about somebody's Aunt Minnie, and I don't know which, it was on his father's side, I think, who used to take a bath in her slip, smoked a corncob pipe, and those are the only things that I remember about her. So yeah, but I don't know what tribe is on her side. Like I know on my side is Cherokee and Choctaw, because my father's father was half Cherokee, and then on my mother's side, her father was probably a quarter Choctaw.
What did you decide to study when you went to college?
Oh, when I went to college, well, I was I went to boy college, liberal arts school. The first couple of years you don't really, I was in band and orchestra and, you know, mostly. I think I mostly did not do well in college because one, I'm not sharing college material. Two, my mother also went there, and I had the same professors that she had. In fact, my whole school career was that way. When I went to junior high school, the teachers she had at the beginning of their careers, I had at the end of their careers. High school, same thing. They all remembered my mother, Ruby White. And so when I went to college, it was the same thing. The professors all remembered my mother, Ruby White. In fact, I had one geology professor say to me, your mother would have done much better than that. So that does not bode well Oh dear, so anyhow. But anyhow, I left. I left college and I don't regret it. Never for a moment. I did what I was happy doing. I got married and I had this batch of kids and had this man I loved who loved me, and boy, I wouldn't give that up for a college degree at all.
Your mom did um, civil rights work? What
Oh,
kind of
yes.
stuff did she do?
Always, she was very aware that black people were not getting a fair shake in our community. She worked very hard. Well, for one thing, I couldn't join the Girl Scouts unless she would form a troop with all black girls. And so she started on her letter writing campaign to the national headquarters, and I mean, her name was mud with all the scout leaders in this area because she was raising Cain with the national Girl Scouts who did not have this policy. This was something particular to Rock County. And so I never did. I mean, I just felt like if they don't want me, then I don't want to be there. So that was one thing. And then she got started on the restaurants would not serve blacks. In fact, the drugstore that we did our business with had a soda fountain that was not operating because he said, if I can't serve everybody, I won't serve anybody. And so he just took the stools out and didn't serve anybody. But in the end, she had a little mother's club, and all these black ladies would go around and sit at Walgreens or Woolworths or the Venus restaurant, and they'd come and tell them they had to leave, and they'd leave, and mother'd tell them nicely that she was going to write the state and tell them that they had been refused and they could expect to hear from the state and probably be fined. And so after a few months of that, they got the message. And white people were amazed because the majority of white people did not realize that the reason black people weren't eating in restaurants was because they were being turned away. So somebody learned something on both sides there. My dad was very fond memories of my father. He worked very hard, and of course most of my memories as a kid was during the Second World War. He worked 4.5 years without a vacation, 7 days a week. I mean, that's how hard that man worked. And he was pretty content most of the time. Mother wouldn't let him always spend the money he wanted to spend, like buy a new car or something like that. But he would do his work and he'd come home, and if supper was ready and the kids were glad to see him and he could sit down and listen to his ball game, then he's a pretty content guy. He just really, it was strange that he didn't like other people's children much, but he loved his own. He loved his own. No, I have only fond memories of my dad. I think I was 22 when Mark was born in 1951. In fact, we just celebrated his 53rd birthday a couple days ago. First time I was able to celebrate with him in over 25 years because he's always off someplace. Either he did not live here or else he was in China or Germany or Ireland or someplace on his birthday. So that was very nice. And then I had 6 children, and I was 32 when Christopher was born. And when I was 22, I thought I was too young to have kids. And then when I was 32, I was the old lady in the maternity ward. And so it just went from one extreme to another.
Did you work during that time?
No, except for a couple of years. In order to get money to put braces on Mark, he had terrible overbite and crooked teeth and the whole thing. And I tried working nights for a couple of years, but nights and I did not agree. I cannot get enough rest, so I quit until Chris went to kindergarten. Then I started. I had a 6-hour job, so that I went to work at 3 and the girls were old enough to watch the boys when they came home from school, and their dad was home by 6 o'clock, and I always had supper ready, and then I was home by 9:30 to tuck them all into bed, so that worked out very well for about, 10, 11 years, I guess. I worked that shift, and then I went full-time on days. So there was always a parent around. We were lucky we were able to have a parent around all the time.
What was it like when you first got married?
Well, it wasn't too bad. We came back here shortly after we got married, and then I had my friends from high school, and we just went with them, and of course they were all white, and so, you know, that's the way it was. And we had a good social life, and we formed a bowling league, and we had supper club once a month. We all met and brought a dish to pass in each other's houses, and we had a good time. We really did.
Oh, and then when you went to get your first house.
Oh, that was an adventure. We lived with your great grandparents for the first year or so because housing was not very available in the early 50s, and then a house became available down the block, and we were able to rent that because there were already some black people on the block. And then we decided to build this house, and nobody wanted to sell us a house. Nobody wanted to sell us a lot. And we ran across this wonderful man, James Finley, who said, I don't believe in this. I will buy you a lot and I will sell it to you. Well, his wife, I think, was trying to throw a monkey wrench in things because she put Tom's name on the deed. But it got past the people, Fullerton Lumber Company. They were selling all the lots out here, and it got past them, and so we got the lot. Jim built us a house. Everybody made his life miserable. Inspectors, they inspected everything. This is probably the best built house in the neighborhood because everything was triple inspected. They just tried to find something wrong with it, and every little thing they pick, and he would correct it. And in the end, he only made something like $2,000 off our house, which wasn't very much of a profit. But bless his heart, they finally drove him out of town because he would do business on a handshake. And some of these crooked people downtown, they all got together and decided they would put Jim out of business. And that's what they did. They just didn't pay him the money that they owed. And he finally left town. He was not in such shape that he could file bankruptcy even. He just lost the money and picked up what he had left and went to Florida. So, he has earned his wings into heaven. That's all I've got to say. If anybody else is up there and Jim isn't, there's something wrong someplace.
What was it like to raise 5 kids? Or 6 kids?
Well, it was 5 because Scott died when he was only 3 weeks old. But it was okay. Some days I thought the days would end. But then when you look back on the years have gone by so quickly. And the kids were pretty good, and I didn't have a lot of trouble with any of the kids. And they each had their own bed to sleep in, which always amazed my grandfather. He gave us 2 pink blankets, one for the boys and one for the girls. Beds, you know. Grandpa, they each had their own bed. What? But they each had their own bed, and they had their room to, their bedrooms. They had room to study. The basement was eat off the floor clean in those days, and so they did all their playing down in the basement. And so, you know, this little house, I used to have 15, 20 people when we were all younger and able to sit on the floor for Christmas Eve. And so, most of the time we had a very good time. In fact, when we were all together, or most of us were together Thursday night, they were just laughing and telling stories about when they were kids and, you know, stuff that their mates had not ever heard, and, you know, we had a marvelous time. And so I guess the kids feel like they did not have too bad a life.
What was it like having your kids cross the color line?
Well, I guess I never thought about being black too much, unless it was brought face to face to me by somebody else. I just didn't think about it too much. I know my kids had some difficult times because they would come home and we would talk about it, and the girls were the ones that maybe were worried the most about would we ever find anybody. I said, someplace out there is somebody that's going to love you for what you are, whether you are white, black, whatever. And whatever color or person that they had brought back to the family, if they loved them, that's all that mattered. And if they wanted to spend the rest of their life with them, that's all that mattered. And I am very blessed that all of my children are still with their original spouses. And there are an awful lot of families that can't, aren't able to say that. So I just truly, truly feel blessed. And I raised these 5 marvelous children who married marvelous spouses and have given me 12 marvelous grandchildren that I delighted. Oh, your grandfather was quite a guy. He could be ornery, stubborn, stick up for anybody though. If anybody was in trouble, they knew the neighbor lived next door and he was getting elderly and his wife was very ill and their house needed painted. So Tom got some of the guys in the neighborhood get together to paint this guy's house. Well, the other guys were just going to slap some paint on it and away they go. Well, Grandpa Ellis is a perfectionist, and so it had to be scraped and it had to be sanded, and it took him about 3 weeks in his spare time to paint this man's house. But this man's house got painted, and it got painted right. And he spent 12 years working in Boy Scouts, and he loved the boys, and then he got interested in birding, and that was his thing. Unfortunately, he was like 35 or 36 years old before he finally grew up and decided what he wanted to be when he, grew up. And it was too late because he had 5 kids and a mortgage. But he just enjoyed birding, and he learned a lot about it, and he met some very interesting people, and they had the 50th anniversary meeting of the Ned Hollister Bird Club here in town, and Tom Ellis was one of the subjects that they talked about what a wonderful birder that he was. And I have articles that were published in publication at Cornell University in New York. He took a course from them, and he found a couple of mistakes, and he wrote and told them about it. And they said, "Oh, please, Tom, let us know if you find anything else." And he was quite an amazing man when you stop to think of it. And he was a terribly good dad, almost to the point of, that's my kid, he can't do any wrong. But he could be forgiven that. And he was kind of dad in the neighborhood, because when our boys were grade school age, almost all the other dads were off pursuing careers. And some of them were gone all week. And Tom was the only dad on the block. So we always had all these little boys in our yard talking to Tom. And I go out now, and these guys that are in their 50s, they'll come out and say, "Hi, Mrs. Ellis, how are you?" I'll say, "Fine." I must look a lot the same, but they look entirely different, because some of them I probably haven't seen since they were 12 or 13. But it's nice to know that he affected so many kids' lives.
And you work at the nursing home now.
Yes.
And what is that like?
Well, I enjoy it, and it gets spooky when I admit somebody that's my age or that I went to school with, or that, and of course living in one town all your life, you know an awful lot of people, and a lot of them come in, and sometimes this would happen at the hospital too. Their families will come and say, oh, it's so good to see a familiar face, because they feel like somehow their parents have not totally lost connection with what they were. And I enjoy it. I enjoy it. And I hope I can keep doing it for a little while longer. Oh,
You just have to keep up the positive thinking.
That's
Yeah.
absolutely right.
Are you making a movie?
Yes, she's
Yeah,
Oh, that's funny.
from my video class.
for her video class. She was down last weekend and she did about 15
So did you
20 minutes.
videotape the party too? Or just your grandma?
Just grandma for now. I did when they all came up for Easter at our house up in Eau Claire.
She
and
did.
I filmed that, so
Well, that's nice.
yeah.
Yes, her video instructor is getting a good camera's eye view of her family.
Right.
That's good.
That's what
though.
she wants. Yeah.
So evidently we'd rather intrigue her.
Well,
So if she
did good.
gets an A in the
Thank you.
class, that's okay.